Our newscast tonight, with dim economic outlook, the Park Geun-hye administration introduces a tax revision, one that's not welcomed by the Chebeols. The changes would require large conglomerates to spill out their cash reserves back in the market. And reform is also desperately needed in the nation's military, with growing number of bullying and suicide cases. A special task force of officers, government officials, and civilian experts is set up to create ways to improve military culture by the end of this year. Samsung and Apple agreed to drop all patent lawsuits except for the ones in the U.S. The significance of this move and how it will shape the future of these tech giants and the tech realm, we turn to an expert for more. Coming up on Early Edition at 6.
I see trees of green, red roses.
늘 남편 먼저,
I see them
늘 자식 먼저.
for me and
레이디 퍼스트라는 말을 믿고 살아온 당신. 오늘만큼은 세상 누구보다 당신이 먼저입니다. 한 분 한 분 특별하게 모시겠습니다.
Excellence in Flight, Korean Air.
It's 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, August 6th, here in Korea, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Na-hyun Kyung.
And I'm Daniel Chan. Thank you for joining us. We begin with the government's tax revision aimed at boosting domestic demand.
And one that is determined to breathe life into the nation's sputtering economy. The move will likely motivate companies to put the cash they've been sitting on back in the market.
Our Kim Jongg starts us off.
The Park Geun-hye administration is proposing a tax revision, putting pressure on large conglomerates to use their cash reserves on investments, paying out dividends, and raising the wages of their employees. Instead of hoarding that cash, the government would like to see it flow into households as a way to boost domestic consumption. Under the government's proposal for a tax revision that goes into effect next year, the government will provide a 5 to 10% tax deduction for companies that raise employee salaries with extra incentives for firms that take additional measures. The dividend tax will be cut to 9% from the current 14% if dividend payouts meet certain targets. The government will impose a 10% tax on the portions of cash reserves that are deemed excessive.
We hope the companies spend their net profits on investment, salaries, and dividends.
The idea of taxing the internal reserves of companies has not been met with kindly by the business community. They contend that many of the businesses have been setting aside earnings for a rainy day. Even if companies increase their dividends to avoid taxes on their cash reserves, they say the impact would not meet expectations for increasing domestic investment and consumption. Chebeols, Arirang News.
Now, citing a slower than expected recovery, the Korea Institute of Finance has revised down this year's growth forecast for the Korean economy to 3.9%. That's 0.2 percentage points lower than its earlier forecast. The think tank attributed the revision to the negative economic growth of the U.S. in the first quarter and a sluggish recovery in the Chinese economy. Also, Korea's domestic demand slowed down following April's ferry disaster, but the institute was a bit more optimistic about the second half of this year, citing the policy direction of President Park Geun-hye's new economic team, as well as a more rapid recovery in developed economies.
And the recent slowdown of exports to China is setting off alarms for trade officials in Korea, as China is Korea's largest trading partner. But some analysts say the crisis could actually serve as an opportunity for some. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The rate of increase in Korea's exports to China is slowing as local Chinese companies are producing cheaper products. Up until now, a majority of Korean exports to China were in the form of intermediate trade. goods in which the product is reprocessed and consumed in the import country. Steel, machinery, and petrochemicals fall in that category, and it's why analysts like Kim Jongg from the Korea International Trade Association have emphasized the need to diversify the country's exports, to shift the focus toward consumer goods or products that can be purchased for use by the average Chinese consumer.
We have to look closely into the recent growth policies and paradigm shifts made by the Chinese government. In the wake of the global financial crisis in 2008, Beijing is trying to develop its domestic market to boost consumption rather than becoming a big factory for exports.
027 Incorporated, a Korean clothing manufacturer for toddlers, is an example of one company that's taking advantage of Beijing's growth policies. It had sales of around $236 million last year and is currently doing business with more than 200 stores across China.
We expect the demand for baby products to increase in China as the government gradually relaxes its one-child policy.
Consumer goods to China from January to May this year increased more than 9% compared to the same period last year, promising signs for Korean industries who are trying to survive in the increasingly competitive global market. Kim Jongg, Arirang News.
After 3 years of cases spread around the globe, Samsung and Apple appear to be laying down their weapons.
They still have some battlegrounds on the two smartphone rivals. They did agree to drop all legal battles against each other, except for those underway in the U.S. Our Park Geun-hye has the details.
Samsung and Apple agreed to drop all litigation cases between them in all countries, except for in the United States. That means some 30 lawsuits will be dropped in courts in 8 countries, including Korea, Japan, Germany, and France. However, the joint statement released Wednesday says the agreement does not cover any cross-licensing arrangements between the two smartphone rivals. The lawsuits between the world's 2 biggest smartphone makers began in 2011 when Apple sued Samsung for copying iPhone features. Samsung responded by countersuing Apple for infringing its wireless transmission technology. The patent trials have since spread to courts around the globe. The mutual rapprochement began in May when Samsung and Apple agreed to drop lawsuits related to Motorola mobility. 1 month later, they agreed to dismiss their appeals of a patent case at the U.S. International Trade Commission. This week's agreement leaves just 2 cases pending in the U.S., both currently in the appeals process. In May, a jury ordered Samsung to pay Apple some $120 million in damages. It also ordered Apple to pay some $160,000 to Samsung for patent infringements. In a separate case in a U.S. court in 2012, a jury verdict ordered Samsung to pay Apple $930 million. Both cases are currently being appealed. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
And for more on this latest development, we have patent attorney Kim Jongg standing by on the line for us.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good, thank you.
Well, our first question is pretty simple. Why are Samsung and Apple making this announcement now?
I think it's time because the second quarter of this year's handset sales report says that in terms of unit, the combined sales of Samsung and Apple in China is less than 40%. So now it's time for them to cooperate further rather than continue to fight.
So you think they are uniting perhaps against bigger players in the market, for example, the Chinese Xiaomi in this case?
Right. Yes.
So why are they keeping, though, the lawsuits in the U.S. open?
U.S. has very significant meaning for both of them because the decision in the U.S. court could be used as a reference for their finalizing settling of other jurisdiction cases because the U.S. law, as in pattern of substance, they are most sophisticated jurisdiction in the world. So any other courts, they can refer to the U.S. decision as a reliable source, whether it's infringing or not. That's the first. Is legally, that's very sophisticated decision. And the second, of course, U.S. market is the largest. So they do not have to continue to fight in other markets. But each market, like China or Korea or Germany, they just decided not to continue to fight, but they can finally agree on terms of agreement or terms of settlement based on U.S. decision. So U.S. can be worked both as a biggest market or also as a most reliable decision on the patent infringement, both.
Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and Xiaomi is a really catchy name, so we need to hurry. Do you think they're on a path toward reaching a cross-licensing deal here, Mr. Kim?
Yes, I believe. If they cannot finally agree on the cross-licensing, today's decision or today's announcement is less significant. So finally, I believe they are negotiating, continue to negotiate for the cross-licensing. Otherwise, there could be another patent dispute again soon. So it's a final mark of peace if they or when they agree on the cross-licensing terms.
Mm-hmm. So what does it mean for the handset industry overall worldwide? I mean, some analysts are saying that it's only going to trigger more fights because they are going to focus on the battles, legal battles in the U.S.
No, that's possible, but I think both of the two leaders in the mobile tech, they realize that now they have focusing on the new technology rather than utilizing or using the current technology as a tool to attack the other partner. They are enemies, but at the same time, because the Chinese manufacturers are coming to the market very rapidly, they, in that respect, they are partners for the new market or new technology in the same product. So they both need to agree to spend more money on the new technology or new features in the mobile set. So otherwise, the market cannot grow. So I think both we spend more money on the new technology. Otherwise, the followers will come to my market, my home ground. So I think it's time for them to agree to spend more money on the technology rather than the legal fee.
Right, when you're a champion, you have to walk and carry yourself like one and stop looking over your shoulder and stare straight at the front to the future.
Landscape is definitely changing.
Okay, yeah.
All right, thank you, sir, for your in-depth analysis.
Okay, thank you.
That was the patent attorney Kim Jongg from the International Association for Protection of Intellectual Property, Korea.
Okay.
A one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News. Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Following a few bullying scandals of Korean soldiers in recent months, the Army is launching a special task force on reforming Korea's military culture. The Army says the task force will consist of officers, government officials, and civilian experts who will come up with a plan to address and combat bullying in the military by the end of this year. Now, this initiative comes after a 22-year-old Army surgeon who was bullied opened fire and killed 5 of his comrades in June. And just last week, it was revealed that a 23-year-old Army private who was also allegedly bullied by members of his military unit was beaten to death in April. And moving on to the ongoing conflict in Gaza, a 3-day ceasefire that went into effect on Tuesday continues there. Israeli and Palestinian delegates will meet in Egypt in an attempt to seek for a more permanent solution in the region. Connie Lee has this report.
The gunfire has gone silent in the Gaza Strip as the 72-hour ceasefire continues. But the clock is ticking. With the truce set to expire Friday morning, Israeli and Palestinian officials have been sent to Cairo for talks, with Egypt acting as mediator. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, speaking to the BBC, urged both sides to negotiate a two-state solution. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the 3-day ceasefire is a brief window of opportunity for the residents to take in the devastation, stock up on supplies, and recover their dead.
Found destruction everywhere. A mosque, Quran books, decomposed children were found under the rubble after 5 days. Public buildings that used to serve people were destroyed.
UNICEF, the children's body of the United Nations, says more than 400 Palestinian children have been killed since the beginning of the conflict, with more than 140 schools damaged or destroyed in less than a month. Along with the truce, Israel said it has withdrawn all of its ground forces, but according to a military spokesperson, the troops are still on the border, ready in defensive positions.
We are taking a defensive stand. We are there in order to prevent further infiltration and further attacks from Gaza, originating from Gaza.
About a quarter of Gaza's population is now displaced, and more than 1,900 Palestinians have been killed in the month-long conflict. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And North Korea's conventional weapons may be falling in the hands of Islamist terrorist groups. According to U.S.-based website 38 North, it raised that possibility this week, saying Pyongyang seems to be using Iran as a logistical link in the chain. Now, the report states that Pyongyang has a historical and possibly continuing arms relationship with non-state actors in the Middle East, namely Hamas and Hezbollah. British daily The Telegraph has also reported that Hamas is negotiating a new arms deal with North Korea, and weapons the two groups could buy from North Korea include AK-47s and ammunition, artillery shells, rocket-propelled grenades, anti-tank missiles, and surface-to-surface missiles. The UN Security Council has issued a fresh warning to North Korea. It said more ballistic missile tests will be met with harsh consequences. In a meeting Tuesday, Council members denounced the regime's recent launches and reminded Pyongyang that they were in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The Council did not specify the measures that would be taken, but they did raise the possibility of further sanctions if North Korea continues to flout its international commitments. North Korea has test-fired short-range ballistic missiles on 7 different occasions so far this year.
The U.S. State Department has said many times in the past Japan's wartime sexual slavery is a serious violation of human rights. And now Washington wants Japan to accept historic facts and take responsibility. Our Shin Se-min has the story.
The United States is urging Japan to resolve the issue of its wartime system of sex slavery and take responsibility for its past atrocities.
We encourage Japan to continue to address this issue in a manner that promotes healing and facilitates better relations with neighboring states.
The State Department confirmed a report on Tuesday that White House and State Department representatives held closed-door interviews with Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul, 2 Korean victims of Japan's sex slavery system, to discuss their experiences. Emphasizing that it wasn't the first face-to-face meeting between the women and U.S. officials, the spokesperson said Washington was open to holding similar meetings again in the future.
It is deplorable and clearly a grave human rights violation of enormous proportions that the Japanese military was involved in the trafficking of women for sexual purposes in the 1930s and 1940s.
Citing a spokesman at the U.S. National Safety Council, Korea's Yonhap News Agency also reports the 2 women met with the officials from the White House Office of Public Engagement. However, the names of the officials who met with the women have not been disclosed. Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul are currently traveling around the U.S., taking part in memorial events remembering the victims of Japan's historical wrongdoings. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Concerns of the Ebola virus spreading to other parts of the world are growing. Health experts around the world are putting their heads together to get the Ebola outbreak in West Africa under control. Our Kim Jongg reports.
The World Health Organization is set to discuss whether to designate this latest Ebola outbreak as a public health emergency of international concern. If the verdict after a two-day emergency committee meeting starting Wednesday is yes, the committee will recommend that the Director General of the WHO declare it as such. The UN body would then implement temporary measures to keep the virus from spreading internationally. The health organization says more than 1,600 people have been infected in the current outbreak and that the number killed is nearing 900. But there are fears that the actual death toll could be much higher than the WHO figures suggest. Voices among the world's leading Ebola specialists are calling on the WHO to make experimental drugs available to victims in West Africa. 2 American citizens who were flown home after being infected with the virus are reportedly recovering after being administered with an experimental drug called ZMapp. Kim Jongg, Arirang News.
And with the outbreak of the Ebola virus front and center of most headlines in recent days, concerns that infectious diseases could spread to other parts of the world are on the rise. Our Kwon So-ah gives us a rundown of which diseases to watch out for before embarking on a trip.
No matter how slim you think your chances are of contracting a dangerous disease, prevention is always better than having to rely on a cure, especially as the world becomes smaller and people travel more. But even those who never leave the country can pick up something nasty, as there are more and more people catching contagious diseases in Korea. In fact, according to the Ministry of Health and Welfare, the number of measles patients this year stood at 410 as of the middle of last month. That's nearly 4 times more than the number recorded over the whole of last year. What's noteworthy is that only 14 of the 410 patients came down with measles abroad. Over 350 cases, the vast majority, caught it as a secondary infection in Korea. This is why taking the required vaccinations and medicine is so important. The most serious and contagious diseases are commonly found in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. The yellow fever vaccination is mandatory when traveling to any country affected by the viral disease, while all the others on the list are recommended. Malaria, for example, which is mainly transmitted by mosquitoes, can be prevented by taking anti-malaria tablets before, during, and after trips to affected areas. Unfortunately, there are still diseases that can't be prevented medically, as can be seen in the recent outbreak of the Ebola virus in Africa. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says basic methods such as washing hands thoroughly, eating cooked food, wearing long sleeves, and staying away from animals give travelers the best chance of avoiding getting sick. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And it's time to check the weather conditions and the forecast for tomorrow. It was rather cool day. It was rainy, but it was cool, right, here in Seoul.
Right, and for details, we turn to our Michelle Bach at the Weather Center. Michelle?
Good evening. The on and off showers have brought down the temperatures here in the capital and some areas in both Chungcheong provinces today. And those rain clouds are expected to move out in the central region soon, but will continue elsewhere into the night. Now, heat wave advisories are in effect in the southern regions where temperatures went as high as 33 degrees earlier today, and tomorrow is actually Malbok here in Korea, which is traditionally the last of the hottest days of the year, but it looks like we are going to have a cooler one due to the rain. Now, besides that, Typhoon Halong is slowly making its way towards Okinawa, Japan, and it should reach the southern regions of Japan and have influence on the southern parts of Korea this weekend, where high winds and strong rain are expected. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Thursday morning at 23 before reaching up to 30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top both at 29 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island will top out at 30, while Dokdo hits 24, while Mangungang tops to 27. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park Geun. Have a wonderful evening.
And this is the end of our newscast. Thank you, Michelle, for that. And thank you for staying with us. To our viewers in different time zones, have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Na Hyun-kyung. For those in Korea, have a great rest of the evening and do join us again tomorrow, same time.